In the deepest depths of Stirling University lies a man who ponders important questions. Not questions like, what's the meaning of life, or why are we here? But questions that center over one concept. How do I scare my audience? Tonight, he will answer that question, reading tales that are so utterly horrifying they may leave you weak at the knees. Welcome to the Spook Zone.
Ladies, gentlemen, other eldritch abominations, I welcome you back to the Spook Zone. It is a sunny 9 o'clock in the morning. I am very tired because I didn't wake up that well, so I had to force myself out of bed, so that was fun. And I'm going to read to you terrifying tales. That was really good. Well done. Good wordplay. Yes, if you have never been on the show before, hi, I am your host. I am going to read to you a collection of two things. One, a story from the Necronomicon, the best weird tales of H.P. Lovecraft. Here's how loud it is when I let it drop on the table. It's pretty big. And I'm also going to read you some internet stories, because those are always a little source of interest, because a lot of people on the internet write very weird and very wonderful things. So today's story is not going to be the one that I had planned, simply because it's way too big, and it would probably take me an entire reading of that, and I want to make sure that I'm utterly prepared for it, because as we all know, H.P. Lovecraft was a man of his time, and even as a man of his time, he was hideously racist in a lot of places. So I want to make sure that if I'm going to be reading a large thing, I don't get caught up and slip into a lot of his writing things where he says some pretty stuff. Instead we're going to be reading a thing which is a little different. It's a shorter story, thank God. It means that I can actually get an internet story in as well, so that's always good. And apparently this one's a little bit meta. It's apparently a horror story about writing, and how we make these sort of terrifying creations in our minds and how we write about them. So I'm kind of interested. I like meta stuff. Stuff that's referential and looks into itself is always very interesting to me. I hope you enjoy this tale. This is a tale called The Unnamable. And I've never read it before, as I usually have not with these stories. I'm basically going through this book as you are. Hopefully it's an enjoyable time. I hope you'll enjoy listening to me prattle on with it. I'm sure it'll be interesting at least. Hopefully not racist. Hope. Yes, this is The Unnamable. We were sitting on a dilapidated 17th century tomb in the late afternoon of an autumn day at the old burying ground in Arkham, and speculating about the unnamable. Looking toward the giant willow in the cemetery, whose trunk had nearly engulfed an ancient, illegible slab, I had made a fantastic remark about the spectral and unmentionable nourishment which the colossal roots must be sucking from that hoary, charnel earth. When my friend chided me for such nonsense and told me that since no interments had occurred there for over a century, nothing could possibly exist to nourish the tree in other than an ordinary manner. Besides, he added, my constant talk about unnamable and unmentionable things was a very puerile device, quite in keeping with my lowly standing as an author. I was too fond of ending my stories with sights or sounds which paralyzed my heroes' faculties and left them without courage, words, or associations to tell what they had experienced. We know things, he said, only through our five senses or our religious intuitions. Wherefore, it is quite impossible to refer to any object or spectacle which cannot be clearly depicted by the solid definitions or fact or the correct doctrines of theology, preferably those of the Congregationalists, with whatever modifications tradition Sir Arthur Conan Doyle may supply. With this friend, Joel Manton, I had often languidly disputed. He was principal of the East High School, born and bred in Boston, and sharing New England's self-satisfied deafness to delicate overtones of life. It was his view that not our only normal, objective experiences possess any aesthetic significance, and that it is province of the artist not so much to rouse strong emotion by action, ecstasy, and astonishment, as to maintain a placid interest and appreciation by accurate, detailed transcript of everyday affairs. Especially did he object to my preoccupation with the mystical and the unexplained, for although believing in the supernatural much more fully than I, he would not admit that it is sufficiently commonplace for literary treatment. That a mind can find its greatest pleasure in escapes from the daily treadmill and in original and dramatic recombinations of images usually thrown by a habit and fatigue into the hackneyed patterns of actual existence was something virtually incredible to his clear, practical, and logical intellect. With him, all things and feelings had fixed dimensions, properties, causes, and effects, and although he vaguely knew that the mind sometimes holds visions and sensations of far less geometrical, classifiable, and workable nature, he believed himself justified in drawing an arbitrary line and ruling out of court all that cannot be experienced and understood by the average citizen. Besides, he was almost sure that nothing can really be unnamable. It didn't sound sensible to him. Though I well realized the futility of imaginative and metaphysical arguments and the complacency of an orthodox sun-dweller, something in the scene of this afternoon colloquy moved me to more than usual contentiousness. The crumbling slate slabs, the patriarchal trees, and the centuried gambrel roots of the witch-haunted old town that stretched around all combined to rouse my spirit in defense of my work, and I was soon carrying my thrusts into the enemy's own country. It was not indeed difficult to begin a counterattack, for I knew that Joel Manton actually half clung to many old wives' superstitions which sophisticated people had long outgrown, beliefs in the appearance of dying persons at distant places, and the impressions left by old faces on the windows through which they had gazed all their lives. To credit these whisperings of rural grandmothers, I now argued a faith in existence of spectral substances on the earth apart from and subsequent to the material counterparts. It argued a capability of believing in phenomena beyond all normal notions, for if a dead man can transmit his visible or tangible image half across the world or down a stretch of the centuries, how can it be absurd to suppose that deserted houses full of queer sentient things, or that old graveyards seem to teem with the terrible unbodied intelligence of generations? And since spirit, in order to cause all the manifestations attributed to it, cannot be limited by any of the laws of matter, why is it extravagant to imagine physically living dead things in shapes or absences of shapes, which must for human spectators be utterly and appallingly unnamable? Common sense, in reflecting on these subjects, I assured my friend, with some warmth, is merely a stupid absence of imagination and mental flexibility. Twilight had now approached, but neither of us felt any wish to cease speaking. Manton seemed unimpressed by my arguments, and eager to refute them, having that confidence in his own opinions which had doubtless caused his success as a teacher, whilst I was too sure of my ground to fear defeat. The dusk fell, and lights faintly gleamed in some of the distant windows, but we did not move. Our seat on the tomb was very comfortable, and I knew that my prosaic friend would not mind the cavernous rift in the ancient, root-disturbed brickwork close behind us, or the utter blackness of the spot brought by intervention of a tottering, deserted 17th-century house between us and the nearest lighted road. There in the dark, upon that riven tomb by the deserted house, we talked on about the Unnamable. And, after my friend had finished his scoffing, I told him of the awful evidence behind the story, at which he scoffed the most. My tale had been called The Attic Window, and appeared in the January 1922 issue of Whispers. In many good places, especially the South and the Pacific coast, they took the magazines off the stands at the complaints of silly milksops, but New England didn't get the thrill, and merely shrugged its shoulders at my extravagance. The thing, it was averred, was biologically impossible to start with, merely another one of those crazy country mutterings which Cotton Mather had been gullible enough to dump into his chaotic Magnalia Christi Americana, and so poorly authenticated that even he had not ventured to name the locality in which the horror occurred. And as to the way I amplified the bare jotting of the old mystic, that was quite impossible, and characteristic of a flighty and notional scribbler. Mather had indeed told of the thing as being born, but nobody but a cheap sensationalist would think of having it grow up, look into people's windows at night, and be hidden in the attic of a house, in flesh and spirit, till someone saw it at a window, centuries later, and couldn't describe what it was that turned their hair grey. All this was flagrant trashiness, and my friend Manton was not slow to insist on that fact. Then I told him what I had found in an old diary kept between 1706 and 1723, unearthed among family papers not a mile from where we were sitting. That, and the certain reality of the scars on my ancestor's chest and back, which the diary described. I told him, too, of the fears of others in that region, and how they were whispered down for generations, and how no mythical madness came to the boy who in 1793 entered an abandoned house to examine certain traces suspected to be there. It had been an eldritch thing. No wonder sensitive students shudder at the Puritan age in Massachusetts. So little is known of what went on beneath the surface, so little, yet such a ghastly festering as it bubbles up putrescently in occasional ghoulish glimpses. The witchcraft terror is a horrible ray of light on what was stewing in men's crushed brains, but even that's a trifle. There was no beauty, no freedom. We can see that from the architectural and household remains and the poisonous sermons of the cramped divines. And inside that rusted iron straitjacket lurked gibbering hideousness, perversion, and diabolism. Here, truly, was the apotheosis of the unnamable. Cotton Mather, in that demoniac sixth book, which no one should read after dark, minced no words as he flung forth his anthemia. Stern as a Jewish prophet and lanconiacally unamazed as none since his day could be, he told of the beast that had brought forth what was more than a beast but less a man, the thing with the blemished eye, and of the screaming drunken wretch which they hanged for having such an eye. This much he badly told, yet without a hint of what came after. Perhaps he did not know, or perhaps he knew and did not dare to tell. Others knew, but did not dare to tell. There's no public hint of why they whispered about the lock on the door to the attic stairs in the house of childless, broken, and bittered old man, who had put up a blank slate slab by an avoided grave. Although one may trace enough evasive legends to curdle the thinnest blood. It is all in that ancestral diary I found. All the hushed innuendos and furtive tales of things with a blemished eye seen at windows in the night or in deserted meadows near the woods. Something had caught my ancestor on a dark valley road, leaving him with marks of horns on his chest and of ape-like claws on his back. And when they looked for prints in the trampled dust, they found the mixed marks of split hooves and vaguely anthropoid jaws. Once a post rider said he saw an old man chasing and calling to a frightful, loping, nameless thing on Meadow Hill in the thinly moonlit hours before dawn, and many believed him. Certainly, there was strange talk one night in 1710 when the childless, broken old man was buried in the crypt behind his own house, in the sight of the blank slate slab. They never unlocked the attic door, but left the whole house as it was, dreaded and deserted. When noises came from it, they whispered and shivered, and hoped that the lock on the attic door was strong. Then they stopped hoping when the horror occurred at the parsonage, leaving not a soul alive or in one piece. With the years, the legends take on a spectral character. I suppose the thing, if it was a living thing, must have died. The memory had lingered hideously. All the more hideous because it was so secret. During this narration, my friend Manton had become very silent, and I saw that my words had impressed him. He did not laugh as I paused, but asked quite seriously about the boy who went mad in 1793, and who had presumably been the hero of my fiction. I told him why the boy had gone to that shunned, deserted house, and remarked that he ought to be interested, since he believed that windows retained latent images of those who had last sat at them. The boy had gone to look at the windows of that horrible attic because the tales of things seen behind them, and had come back, screaming manically. Manton remained thoughtful as I said this, but gradually reverted to his analytical mood. He granted, for the sake of argument, that some unnatural monster had really existed, but reminded me that even the most morbid perversion of nature need not be unnamable, or scientifically indescribable. I admired his clearness and persistence, and added some further revelations I had collected among the old people. Those later spectral legends, I made plain, related to a monstrous apparitions more frightful than anything organic could be, apparitions of gigantic bestial forms, sometimes visible and sometimes only tangible, which floated about on moonless nights and haunted the old house, the crypt behind it, and the grave where a sapling had sprouted beside an illegible slab. Whether or not such apparitions had ever gored or smothered people to death, as told in uncorroborated traditions, they had produced a strong and consistent impression, and were yet darkly feared by very aged natives, though largely forgotten by the last two generations, perhaps dying for lack of being thought about. Moreover, so far as aesthetic theory was involved, if the psychic emanations of human creatures be grotesque distortions, what coherent representation could express or portray so gibbous and infamous a nebulosity as the spectre of a malign, chaotic perversion, itself a morbid blasphemy against nature? Moulded by the dead brain of a hybrid nightmare, would not such a vaporous terror constitute in all loathsome truth the exquisitely, the shriekingly unnamable? The hour now must have grown very late. A singularly noiseless bat had brushed by me, and I believed it touched Manson also, for although I could not see him, I felt him raise his arm. Presently, he spoke. "But is that house with the attic window still standing and deserted?" "Yes," I answered. "I have seen it." "And did you find anything there, in the attic, or anywhere else?" "There were some bones up under the eaves. They may have been what the boy saw. If he was sensitive, he wouldn't have needed anything in the window glass to unhinge him. If they all came from the same object, it must have been a hysterical, delirious monstrosity. It would have been blasphemous to leave such bones in the world, so I went back with a sack and took them to the tomb behind the house. There was an opening where I could dump them in. Don't think I was a fool. You ought to have seen that skull. It had 4-inch horns, but a face and jaw, something like yours and mine. At last I could feel a real shiver run through Manton, who had moved very near, but his curiosity was undeterred. And what about the window panes? They were gone. One window had lost its entire frame, and in the others there was not a trace of glass in the little diamond apertures. They were that kind, the old lattice windows that went out of use before 1700. I don't believe that they've had any glass for 100 years or more. Maybe the boy broke them if he got that far. The legend doesn't say. Manton was reflecting again. I'd like to see that house, Carter. Where is it? Glass or no glass, I must explore it a little. And the tomb, where you put those bones, and the other grave without an inscription, the whole thing must be a bit terrible. You did see it, until it got dark. My friend was more wrought upon than I suspected, for at this touch of harmless theatricalism, he started neurotically away from me and actually cried out with some sort of gulping gasp, which released a strain of previous repression. It was an odd cry, and all the more terrible because it was answered. For as it was still echoing, I heard a creaking sound through the pitchy blackness, and I knew that a lattice window was opening in that accursed old house beside us. And because all the other frames were long since fallen, I knew that it was the grisly, glassless frame of that demonic attic window. Then came a noxious rush of noisome, frigid air from that same dreaded direction, followed by a piercing shriek just beside me on that shocking, rifted tomb of man and monster. In another instant, I was knocked from my gruesome bench by the devilish threshing of some unseen entity of titanic size, but undetermined nature, knocked sprawling on the root-clutched mould of that abhorrent graveyard, while from the tomb came such a stifled uproar of gasping and whirring that my fancy peopled the rayless gloom with Miltonic legions of the misshapen damned. There was a vortex of withering, ice-cold wind, and then the rattle of loose bricks and plaster, but I had mercifully fainted before I could learn what it meant. Manton, though smaller than I, is more resilient, for we opened our eyes at almost the same instant, despite his greater injuries. Our coaches were side by side, and we knew in a few seconds that we were in St. Mary's Hospital. Attendants were grouped about intense curiosity, eager to aid our memory by telling us how we came there, and we soon heard of the farmer who had found us at noon in the lonely field beyond the Meadow Hill, a mile from the old burying ground, on a spot where an ancient slaughterhouse is reputed to have stood. Manton had 2 malignant wounds in the chest, and some less severe cuts and gougings in the back. I was not so seriously hurt, but was covered with welts and constitutions of the most bewildering character, including the print of a split hoof. It was pain that Manton knew more than I, but he told nothing to the puzzled and interested physicians till he had learned what our injuries were. Then he said we were the victims of a vicious bull, though the animal was a difficult thing to place and account for. After the doctors and nurses left, I whispered an awestruck question. Good God, Manton, but what was it? Those scars, what? Was it like that? And I was too dazed to exult when he whispered back a thing I had half expected. No, it wasn't that way at all. It was everywhere, a gelatin, a slime, yet it had shapes. 1,000 shapes of horror beyond all memory. There were eyes, and a blemish. It was the pit, the maelstrom, the ultimate abomination. Carter, it was the Unnamable. Woo, that was an interesting one. You know what? Apart from that mild anti-Semitism in the middle, that was pretty clean. So good on Lovecraft for that. Well done. But apart from that, was a really little interesting meta tale. I think it's very interesting talking having this little story where these 2 characters discuss and debate whether or not the craziness that Lovecraft writes about is real or can be real. I think it's a very interesting concept. And I think it was pretty well written. Right, so... Okay, so I'm going to say this. Next time you tune in, I'm definitely going to be reading I think I'm going to be definitely reading the Under the Pyramid. Hopefully it's not, like, complete trash. It might be. Lovecraft has a habit of occasionally going a bit too far in his descriptions and in his racism. So, you never know. We might have a complete terrible, terrible nightmare on our hands. We might have a complete fun time. Only time will tell. We shall see. In any case, I think it's time for an internet story. Something from the internet. Wow, that'd be great. I think that'd be really good. So I'm going to go and see if I can find me a story that I've not read before on the internet, which is the best place for some horrible stuff. And by that I mean legitimate horror, not like bad stories. Right, let's see here. This is a big one. Jeepers Creepers. Don't know if I want to make it too big. I've got time for a big one, but at the same time, I also kind of don't. Yeah, this is huge. Jesus. Nah, we shan't do that one. It's a bit too big and a bit too many grammatical errors, apparently. Let's see. 5 minutes to read. Alright, I think this is going to be good. Yeah, it's apparently going to be a short story, so this might last you about 10 minutes, so I probably am going to read something else after this. I might, if I've got time, try something a little bit different, maybe do something a little bit avant-garde, maybe go to a different place for storytelling, not just the regular spot I usually use. Yeah, I think I'm going to read this one. Alright, this is a fun tale, a tale of magic and mystery, and I shall tell you what it is called. It's called My Wife Won't Stop Sleep Talking, and it is apparently written by Christopher Maxim. I think I've read Christopher Maxim before. That name rings a bell. I'm going to quickly read who Christopher, like, if he's written stuff before. Christopher Maxim writing. Christopher Maxim writer. Yeah, this I have heard this guy before. He seems to be quite prevalent in the horror writing scene on the online space. Yeah, cool. All right then, that's pretty neat. I'm keen to see how it's going to look. Yeah. Give it a go. This is My Wife Won't Stop Sleep Talking by Christopher Maxim. I hope you enjoy. Just get some music up for you. Set the mood. Set the scene. Here we go. My wife and I had moved into our new apartment just a few months ago. It was a downgrade from our previous home, as we lived in a large but quaint cottage. It had been my wife's dream home. For 3 years we'd lived there. We hadn't wanted to leave, but it was a necessary step for us. You see, Jessica and I used to live down south. Everything was going well for a while, but my law firm decided to promote me out of the blue. It was unexpected, but very much appreciated. Unfortunately, the job entailed transferring to another of one of our many locations. The one in question was located in New England. We spoke long and hard on the matter, and after much deliberation, Jess agreed to the move. It's important to note that the dollar doesn't stretch as far up north as it does down south, and it's also harder to find employment. That's why we were downgrading our living space. Until Jess could find another job, we would have to suffer. At least that's the way she looked at it. Tensions were high in the first few weeks after the move. I could tell Jess was irritable. She missed our old house, our old friends, and working a steady job, she had nothing to do with her time. So she was bored out of her mind. This led to many fights, and for a while it seemed like we would never settle in. About a month after the move, things started looking up. Jess found temporary work as a part-time editor at the local TV station. She loved the work and couldn't have been happier with her co-workers. It seemed like everything was going fine. Not perfect, but fine. That is when the sleep talking began. It was to be expected, and honestly I'm surprised it didn't start up sooner. You see, my wife is a restless sleeper whenever there's a big change in her life, good or bad. It happened when we got married, when we moved into our first home, and when she had the miscarriage, which I'll touch on more later. Jess knows she sleep talks. As I used to bring it up from time to time, I would laugh each morning, recalling the weird things she said the night before. This always made her uncomfortable. She seemed to be embarrassed by it. That's why, after the first night of sleep talking in our apartment, I didn't say anything. The sleep talking went on for a couple weeks. It was at this time that her temp job at the TV station came to an end. Without a job to keep her mind off things, her nightly outbursts became worse. She began screaming at odd times during the night, in which I would be forced to calm her down. One night, her scream turned to tears. As she was crying, she said something I'll never forget. "I wish you were dead." I knew my wife was asleep, but as I sat there by her side, calming her the best I could, I felt the need to press the matter. "You wish who were dead, hun?" To my surprise, she responded, "You." This caught me off guard. It's a strange thing to want your husband dead, and even stranger while you're asleep. "Why?" I asked. "You're ruining my life." Those 4 words cut deep. Merely, whether they were the meant or merely the product of a tired mind, they were the kinds of words that demanded self-reflection. I wondered for a moment if I was really ruining her life, or at least if I was to blame for her night terrors. My wife remained silent for the rest of the night. I know this because I stayed up. Contemplation and worry kept me from a good night's rest, and I didn't believe for a second that my wife actually wanted me dead. But her late-night antics were certainly a cause for concern. Between the screaming episodes and the morbid dialogue, this was the worst her condition had ever been. The next morning I came pretty damn close to telling her about what had happened, but I kept thinking about how she'd react when and what she'd say. It was too much. I didn't want to burden her any more than I already had, especially after she'd just been laid off. In light of this, I kept my mouth shut. The following night, the screams were gone. This was a comfort, but a fleeting one, and out of the blue, just as I was about to shut my eyes and call it a night, the sleep talking commenced once again. Sometimes I think about how I'll do it. I chalked the statement up to pure dream-induced nonsense. But then she continued. "While you're asleep in bed, I'll get up and go to the kitchen." I didn't know what she was talking about, but as she kept speaking, it dawned on me. There were some moments of inaudible gibberish, but from the bits and pieces that were clear, I could paint a pretty good picture of what she was saying. "Reach in to grab knife over and over again, blood oozing off the bed. Can't ruin my life anymore." My wife was describing her plan to murder me. As deeply unsettling as this was, I couldn't help but chuckle to myself. It was a dream after all, nothing more. I can't say I haven't done some weird things in my own dreams, things I would never do in real life. Jess was mad at me over the move, and she was working out her frustrations while she slept. At least, that's what I convinced myself. The sleep talking continued for a few weeks, and I hoped that her midnight venting sessions were doing some good, but without a degree in psychology, I couldn't be really certain. All I could do was listen to her ramble about offing me each night and wait for her condition to run its course. The longest her sleep talking had ever lasted was a month, so it was safe to say it would be over soon. A month passed. Then 2. Jess didn't let up. Every night it was the same routine. Either incoherent nonsense or babblings about how she'd like to hurt me. It was getting old. But one night changed everything. As my wife slept, she uttered some words that tore right through my heart. I lost my baby because of you. My emotions swirled about and formed a sour concoction that rested in the pit of my stomach. This time, I had to know what she meant. What do you mean? There was a brief moment of silence, but eventually Jess offered me an answer. There was some gibberish mixed in, but she was able to get her point across. You made me want kids. You put life in me. Now I'm alone. This struck a nerve and caused a few tears to roll down my cheek. It was my idea to try and have a kid. Jess never wanted children, but she made herself want to, for me. That's why after the miscarriage I was surprised to find her absolutely devastated. I had no clue how much she'd warmed up to the idea of having a baby. My tears were interrupted by more sleep talking, of the worst variety. I'll kill you. I promise. That was the last thing she said all night. It's been roughly a week since my wife made that promise. As disturbing as that threat was, I could have easily brushed it off with the rest, assuming it too was the product of stress, and was nothing for me to worry about. Unfortunately, I can't stop worrying about it. Jess is scaring the crap out of me. I'm now taking short naps and sleeping with one eye open, and it's all because of one thing. Now, she's sleepwalking. Yikes! That's might wanna broach that with her. Maybe say a thing. Maybe bring that up, because if you don't, you'll get killed. Just a little heads up. Don't just leave don't say nothing if your wife is planning to kill you while she sleeps. That's weird. That's bad. Say words. Make sure that doesn't happen. Not good idea. Don't do it. Anyway, that was really fun. I really enjoyed that little story. It was short but sweet, and it was really, really good. Yeah. Let me see. Ooh, this one looks fun. I love little stories like this. Oh, it's another one by Christopher Maxim, at least, as well. And it's 11 minutes, and I think that'll be a good amount of time for a story. Yeah, I like this idea. It's about a subject that I've heard about a lot of, and it's these sort of ideas that make me go, oh, I like this. It's a story about sleep paralysis, which, if you don't know, is an experience where you wake up, but your body still thinks you're dreaming, right? So the sort of images and things that your body, your brain creates while you're dreaming, you were awake while that's happening, and you hallucinate, and it's terrifying because you can't move, because your body still thinks you're sleeping. It's a humongous amount of horror stories are written inspired by these sorts of things, about stories where you can't move, but there's something at the corner of your eye that's there. I've heard lots of tales about actually people suffering from this, and I dread the day I might suffer from this, because I hope I won't, but you never know. Maybe reading all of this horror stuff will eventually rub off on me to the point where I just see things when I wake up, and that wouldn't be good. That'd be bad. Yeah, I think this will be fun. And I think this story is worth a read. This is 11 minutes, apparently. It's probably going to be longer, considering I'm reading it, and I like to take pauses, and I like to go slow, and sorry about that, I just yelled at you. Anyway, let's do it. This is another song. I'm getting into my bloody headspace with a music show. This is another story by Christopher Maxim. I hope you enjoy it. It'll be a fun one, I'm sure. This is how to exit your body during sleep paralysis. I'm an apt dreamer. I'm fascinated by the sleeping mind, and as such, I keep a dream journal to catalogue every night and every thought that passes through my brain at night. I set at least one alarm every day so that I'm able to wake up during REM sleep and recall my grandest dreams. Sometimes I just go back to sleep, but for the most part, I've kept up with it. It's been an enlightening experience, and so far I've filled a couple dozen notebooks. In addition to cataloguing my dreams, I also study the phenomenon. I've read almost every book on the subject and watched countless documentaries. I even took an elective back in high school called The Dreaming Mind. I was one of 7 kids in the class. In other words, most of my waking life is consumed by sleep in one form or the other. One day, I visited the local authors section of the town library in hopes of finding a book on dreams that I hadn't read yet. This is from the one section I'd never been in. I expected to find a bunch of self-published romance novels, and for the most part I did, but there was one non-fiction title that caught my eye. It was called Sleep Tactics: Exercises for a Mind at Rest by Jack Grovewood. The blurb on the back was vague and made it seem like a self-help book with quotes like, "Learn the secrets to a good night's rest. Feed your mind's insatiable appetite for better understanding." Not a book on dreams per se, but it did pique my interest. Delving into the book more at home, I found it to be more up my alley than I previously expected. It was filled with chapters pertaining to lucid dreaming, meditation, and even sleepwalking. I was already familiar with most of this content, but it turned out to be an enjoyable read. It wasn't until the last chapter, though, that I was taken completely off guard. I will outline most of it below. Chapter 16. How to Exit Your Body. Disclaimer, this is not an OBE or out-of-body experience. As stated in Chapter 8, Out of Body, Out of Bed, I do believe in OBEs, but I find that they're just another form of dreaming. What I'm about to divulge to you is something completely different. It is neither an OBE nor a dream state. This is a way to truly exit your body, using sleep paralysis as the catalyst. Before I discuss specifics, I'd like to go over a few prerequisites. In order to pull this off, you have to be proficient at lucid dreaming, and what I mean by this is that you have to have lucid dreams on a regular basis, and retain lucidity for long periods of times in these dreams. It also helps if you're able to manipulate your dream environment while lucid. If you can only lucid dream on occasion, you'll have to practice and train your mind to do so more often. See Chapter 6, Becoming a Lucid Lucy. If you, however, are unable to lucid dream or have never experienced one before, then this isn't for you. You will not be able to do it, I'm afraid. Another requirement is sleep paralysis. Most of us has experienced this at one time or another, but it will help immensely if you experience regularly. Coupled with lucidity and a focused mind, sleep paralysis is your only way out of your own skin, so to speak. That's all you need in the way of mental capabilities, more or less. It's an added bonus if you've an OBE or have ever had a wake-initiated lucid dream. See Chapter 7, Wake Under Sleep. Now, on to the fun part. I'm going to lay this out in a step-by-step fashion, followed by a more detailed explanation of what to expect upon achieving your first departure. Keep in mind, results may vary. Step 1. Fall asleep on your back in a slanted position. It can either be on a recliner or a car seat, but your body has to be diagonal relative to ground level. It's the only way I've been able to get this work. Ever been able to get this to work. For one reason or another, gravity plays a role. Step 2. Attain sleep paralysis. This is more of a waiting game than a step, as you can't really execute this at will. You'll just have to keep trying until it happens. When it does happen, lucidity is key. You have to be aware that you're in a state of sleep paralysis and be unafraid of your lack of mobility. This is one of the ways that being a lucid dreamer comes in handy. Step 3. Once paralyzed, attempt to move your legs. If you're in a proper position, at least one of them should be mobile. If you can't move either of them, then you'll have to start over and experiment by tilting your seat in different positions. Step 4. Upon freeing one or more of your legs, attempt to free your arms. They should feel incredibly stiff and heavy, and you shouldn't be able to move them, try as you might. You should feel, however, a sharp sting in your head. Don't be alarmed. You're not having an aneurysm. This is completely normal and necessary to make your exit. Step 5. As difficult as strenuous as it may be, keep trying to move your arms. As you do this, attempt to move the rest of your body as well. Put everything you have into fighting the paralysis. Just don't fall back asleep. Step 6. As you wrestle with your mind and body, the stinging sensation in your head is going to get exponentially worse. It won't cause you pain, but it'll create a great discomfort. Let it happen. As the sensation in your brain builds, you'll start to feel yourself drift away from your body. Don't fight it. Your mind is like a rubber band. It'll want to bounce back from where it's being stretched. Don't let it. Follow the flow of departure. If you steal your mind's focus and follow these instructions to a T, you will have successfully exited your earthly meat sack and unlocked a marvel of the mind that only has just begun to be understood. That's the gist of it. The author went on to say that the world you find yourself in upon departure will harbour some differences to the one you started in. It will appear similar in almost every way. However, there will be no people here. None at all. On top of that, nothing will budge. Everything remains in its place, as still as it can be. After explaining how to re-enter one's body, the author ended the chapter with an eerie warning. Whatever you do, don't go near the water. Needless to say, I was dumbfounded. The entire book up to that point was factual, but that last chapter seemed like something right out of a science fiction novel. It certainly made for an interesting read, but I couldn't make heads or tails of it. Why have such an out-of-place pseudoscience chapter in an otherwise reputable book? It doesn't make any sense. About a week passed before I thought about the book again. It was just about time to return it to the library, so I decided to reread it, namely the last chapter. As absurd as it seemed, I teetered between laughing it off once and for all and actually giving it a shot. I did meet all the requirements, and it would amuse me to some small extent. I could, at the very least, say that I tried it out. After much private deliberation, I decided, why the hell not? I knew it wasn't going to work, but part of me thought that maybe something would happen. Plus, was there really anything better for me to do during an episode of sleep paralysis? The only minor nuisance was that I'd have to sleep on one of my recliners instead of the comfort of my king-size Sertra mattress. But it would only be one night. I'd slept on worse things before. Long story short, I had 3 episodes of sleep paralysis on the night in question. First one, I was too groggy, completely forgot about the book and quickly fell back to sleep. Second one lasted a bit longer and I remembered to try the method. I could just barely move one of my legs upon trying the arms. I did feel a small but noticeable discomfort in my head. I really wondered for a split second if the method was really leading up to something, and then became a bit excited over it. Because of this, I woke up. Reflecting on what had happened, I became intrigued. I still didn't believe that I could exit my body, but I knew something was going on. I decided to tilt the recliner back a bit and try again. This time, I would have better control. Next episode came pretty quick. I hadn't fallen asleep yet, but my body was getting ready to. This is it, I thought. I allowed the paralysis to fully set in before attempting anything. It was difficult not to fall asleep, but I managed. This time around, I was able to gain full control over my left leg. I moved it back and forth a bit before trying to free my arms. True to the method, they wouldn't budge and felt oddly stiff, more so than usual. This is when the familiar sting set in. It jarred me, but I kept going. The more I tried to move my arms, the greater the sting grew. Believe it or not, as I continued, I did, in fact, feel myself drifting away from my body. I tried to get up. I tried to keep it up, but my nerves got the best of me. I lost all control for a moment and jolted back into my body, immediately waking up in the process. That experience startled me. It was beginning to seem more and more likely that the last chapter of this book was somehow accurate. My curiosity became aroused to such an extent that I had to tell someone about it. Luckily, I knew just the person. My buddy Josh is a character. He believes in a lot of what I don't. Because of this, we butt heads on a lot of topics. In simple terms, I'm a skeptic and he's a believer. One thing we both share a love for, however, is dreams. He's the only person I can talk to at length about the subject, and he also happens to meet the same requirements for departure. I was hoping he could join me in the sleep session and help me get to the bottom of what was happening. I called Josh up and told him everything. He was ecstatic, as I knew he would be. He agreed to meet me the following night at my place for a departure, and in his mind, this was definitely going to work. But I was still weary. In any case, I was happy to have someone to tag along with for the ride. Fast forward to the following night. We hang out for a bit, and I show Josh the book. His eyes grow wide upon reading the final chapter, and he can't wait to try it out for himself. I told him not to get his hopes up, but it was clear to me that they already were. We laid down at opposite ends of my living room on my two recliners. Josh cracked a joke about how this was the first night we'd be sleeping together, and I threw a pillow at him. And then we were off. Shut-eye was right around the corner. This is when things get weird. I didn't have an episode of sleep paralysis right away, but I did end up waking a few hours into my nap. I noticed that Josh was fast asleep in the recliner across the room. Having to empty my bladder, I walked past him to get to the bathroom, tripping over his legs in the process. I met the floor with a thud and turned around to see if Josh had woken. He hadn't. I knew he was a heavy sleeper, but even he should have woken up, given the commotion. Worried, I yelled his name. Nothing. I tried shaking him. Still nothing. I grabbed his wrist and checked his pulse. It was there, but it was weak. This is when I panicked. I ran to my room, grabbed my phone, and scrambled to hit the call button. Just as I was about to dial 911, I heard a loud gasp in my next room, like a diver coming up for air. I ran out to the living room, and to my delight, Josh was awake. He looked up at me with eyes wide and said, "Dude, it fucking worked!" I was flabbergasted. Though Josh was an over-enthusiastic believer and downright stubborn at times, he was not a liar. I asked him over and over again if he was sure it wasn't just a dream, and he said it was 100% certain. I believed him. Why else would I not been able to wake him? Why else would his pulse been so weak? We spent the next couple hours talking about the experience. Josh told me that the author was right. Upon leaving his body, he found himself in the world around him, only everything was perfectly still. He tried opening the door to my house, but the knob wouldn't turn and the door wouldn't budge. It took him a while to realize this, but he ended up discovering that he could phase through walls. This is one of the reasons that caused me to think that this might have been a dream. Josh went on to tell me that the world looked different and well. He said it was like having the contrast dialed up on a picture. Combined with the eerie stillness, he said, it was truly like being stuck in a photograph. I tried to imagine it, but I knew I needed to see it for myself. We made plans to go back to sleep and enter the world together. Though I was anxious, I felt confident that I could pull it off this time, and I did. I made my first successful departure that night and found Josh waiting in the room for me, next to his sleeping body. While seeing ourselves sleeping was fascinating in itself, I wanted more than anything to see the world outside. For a few weeks, Josh slept over at my house and we explored the new world. It was fun and downright addicting. Curiosity is what kept us going. We wanted to know more about the odd realm we'd found ourselves in. Here are just a few things we learned. The lighting is fixed. It always looks to be about noontime, though there's no sun in the sky. We can't phase through older buildings, not sure why. There are no people, like the book said, but also no animals or even insects. Sound is reverbed. There's always a slight echo when Josh and I talk. It is possible to fall asleep in the world, but you won't dream. If you travel too far from your body, you'll hit an invisible wall and be unable to go any further. Time doesn't pass in the real world while we're departed. After about a month of exploring, things changed. The more and more we explored, the more uncomfortable I felt. It almost seemed like something had its eye on us, even though there was no one around. Josh was the opposite. Our late-night adventures were becoming so routine for him that he was becoming bored. He kept talking about the water and how he wanted to get a closer look at the ponds near the main road. I kept reminding him about the author's warning, but Josh didn't seem to care. Water was the one thing we hadn't toyed around with yet, and then eventually Josh's curiosity got the best of him. One night, upon leaving my body, Josh was nowhere to be found. I thought that maybe he hadn't departed yet, but he always beat me to the punch. This could only mean one thing. I phased through the walls of my home and raced to the nearby pond. Josh was there. He was standing at the end of the dock that the locals would fish off of. I yelled out to him, "Josh, what are you doing?" "It's fine, see, there's nothing to be afraid of, it's just water." I watched as Josh reached down and touched the surface of the pond. It rippled. This struck me as incredibly bizarre. It shouldn't have reacted to his touch. We'd been there for weeks and hadn't seen a single thing move. Even the air was still. Perplexed, I started walking towards Josh. He lifted his hands up, just as awestruck as I was. As he pulled his arm back, the ripple expanded. With it, a small portion of the water turned black, and after a few moments, I watched as something reached out from the blackness. It was a hand. A fucking hand. It reached up over the dock and grabbed Josh's leg, yanking him downward. He went feet first into the water, holding onto the dock for dear life. As he screamed, I ran towards him as fast as I could. Before I could get even halfway to his position, I watched him disappear into the water. I ran the rest of the way, but the blackness had faded and returned to normal. My best friend was gone. Breathless and in shock, I ran away. I wanted to save Josh, but I didn't know how. I also felt that if I re-entered my body, perhaps I'd find Josh awake in the real world. It was wishful thinking. It was all I had. The wishful thinking fell flat when I awoke. Josh was still unconscious. I tried and tried, but I couldn't get him to wake up. Eventually, I called 911 and he was taken away on a stretcher. The doctors say he's in a coma, but I can't discern what caused it. And that's everything. I'm a fucking wreck over what happened. I've tried visiting Josh in hospital, but I can't face his parents, and they're always there. Instead, I go out to the pond, in the real world, hoping that somehow I'll find answers. All I do is end up finding more questions. I haven't even departed since Josh was taken. I've tried, but something's holding me back. It might be fear. Josh's analogy was right. That world was like a photograph. A still frame of the world we were never meant to see. A moment frozen in time with a layer of reality stripped away. And there's something living in there. Despite this, I need to save my friend. He didn't heed the author's warning, but I'm the reason he entered that world in the first place. I have to go back. That was a weird one. good but weird. Like as much as I like playing with the ideas of like how your brain treats like acts when it comes to like how it like thinks and dreams and all that jazz. That was weird. That went in a direction I was not expecting. Like, whoa. I mean, a lot of, like, comments on this are like a lot of people are saying, "Man, this reminds me of Stranger Things," and it's like, yeah, this is basically like an upside downy world. Yeah. That was interesting. I enjoyed that. Yeah. That's essentially all I've got time for, ladies and gentlemen. I read a story from Lovecraft that wasn't horribly racist, so well done, Lovecraft. It was interesting. It was good. I read 2 stories by Christopher Maxim, which were both very interesting and very well written. I gotta admit, I never get over swearing in horror stories. I don't know why, and I know it's like part of how people act and talk. But it just seems weird to me sometimes when I'm just reading, like, I'm going from Lovecraft's like, extrapolate, big words, to, holy shit, dude, whoa! Like, that difference in how, in speech is always a bit crazy to me. But in any case, still fun. And I had a really good time. I hope you did too. Thank you all for watching, ladies and gentlemen. This has been the Spook Zone. I hope you've had a wonderful, wonderful morning. Hopefully it's woken you up. Hopefully you're scared and ready to start the day with a newfound fear in your eyes. And I hope it was an enjoyable time, and I hope you have a good day. But above all, stay spooked.